Welcome to our Executive Plenty in 20. My name's Simon Tyson. For those of you who haven't seen them before, our Plenty in 20 series is literally in the name. We aim to give plenty of value, plenty of content in 20 minutes. We have a whole series for managers and leaders at all levels. This is the first of a series specifically for executives and people and culture leaders, although anyone's welcome to view it. In this one, we're going to look at 11 ways executive teams screw up workplace culture. Now, we know that you don't want to know how to screw up workplace culture, but my experience in over 30 years is I've never met an executive team that's not making at least one of these mistakes. So by knowing about the pitfalls, you can address them, as we'll say shortly. A little bit of background for me. I have run this organisation since 1993 and have worked with hundreds and in fact thousands of clients around Australia, overseas, across corporate, government, not-for-profit. I've also worked in senior executive roles as CEO, COO, etc. So a lot of this is from lived experiences as well as from my work as an external consultant. In defining culture, our approach to this is the sum of every choice made by every person at every level, every day. The analogy we use is that culture is like a swimming pool and every choice is a drop that goes into that swimming pool. What, of course, we also know is that leaders have a disproportionate impact. The more senior they are, if you like, the bigger the drops they put in that pool. So the more conscious they have to be about what they do and how that reflects, how that impacts, what that says about culture. When we talk about the choices people make, they're made in response to expectations, perceived expectations. Now, they're much more about what people perceive rather than what is explicitly stated. And we'll cover that in more detail a little later. So let's get in to the 11 ways that executive teams might be having a negative impact on the culture. If you know the pitfalls, as we said before, you can avoid them. So we've divided these into categories. The first category is around definition issues with workplace culture. And the first of them, number one, is around lack of clarity. Very often when I work with organisations, they're really good at telling me about the problems they have with their workplace culture. They're not as good at telling me what they actually want. So the first step, I believe, for an executive team is to get really clear on your aspirational culture. What does great look like? And a couple of ways that we won't dive into in detail, but I'll touch on briefly, are being able to say to your people, when you're behaving consistently with our culture, this is what it looks like, i.e. a set of values. And secondly, when we're behaving consistently with our culture, this is what we're doing for the people that we exist to serve. And we call that our why. So why is what your people doing important? Why is it important to strive and create that exceptional culture that delivers great outcomes? The second definition issue is around inconsistency and incompatibility. And this goes back to what we said before about the gap between what we say and what we do. So if people are getting mixed messages about culture, if each team has their own idea about the aspirational culture, then that becomes a problem. That brings people into conflict, and conflict's fine. But when it's unresolvable conflict about what great workplace culture looks like, then that becomes an issue. The incompatibility is that really honest conversation as an executive. Are we asking for a culture that's just not possible given the other pressures, given the other drivers, given the environment we work in, given the resourcing we have? So as an executive, have an honest discussion. Is there a consistent message and is it compatible with our realities? The third definition issue is around the narrowness of that definition. Very often we see organisations define their workplace culture in terms of one set of outcomes, perhaps the results they're achieving. In our view, an ideal workplace culture has to deliver on 3 sets of needs. And we don't have time to go into this in detail, but the 3 sets of needs are, it has to meet the expectations, the needs of the people you exist to serve. If you don't, you've got a very short-term future. Every organisation exists to meet needs, and it's recognising that it's a diverse set of needs, 3 sets of needs. And the first, as I say, is the people you exist to serve. Have to meet those well. But our workplace culture also has to meet the needs of the people that work there. People come to work, and if the natural inclination is to say, well, people come to work for money, I believe that defines it too narrowly. That might tell you why they work full stop, but not why they work here. So what needs can you meet that make this a good place for the people that work there? And of course, you've got to meet the needs of the people that fund or own or govern or regulate the organisation. So a great workplace culture, as you're defining what that looks like, it must meet all 3 sets of needs. Now, we just touched on an issue there that does require or does have the possibility to dive a lot deeper. We are going to send you after this session another free opportunity, and this is to see our executive on-demand keynote. Same keynote I present at conferences and in boardrooms around Australia, around the world, and we have made a pre-recorded version of it that will dive deeper into some of the elements of today. It's not the same topic, but it's about a strategic approach to transforming your workplace culture. That link will come out by email. Keep an eye out for it. Again, completely free. So the next set of behaviours or things that executives do that can interfere with workplace culture is all about executive behaviours. And the first of them is modelling. And there's this wonderful phrase that what you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. So often we see managers at all levels and sometimes executives talk about the culture they want, talk to their teams about the aspirations, but then behave in ways that are not consistent with that. Perhaps their leadership style is not consistent with the values they say are important. Maybe people don't feel valued by their leadership approach. Maybe they're not inclusive. Maybe they're not respectful. Maybe they're not as committed to excellence as they're asking for from their teams. As I said right at the beginning, the drops you put in that pool are so much weightier than the other drops, and the more senior you become, the bigger the drops. So modelling is absolutely the number one thing in terms of executive behaviours that we need to keep aligned. The next thing is that insular thinking. And we see this in every organisation. It's a really natural inclination. It's a really natural thing to have happen. And that's the assumption that everyone in the organisation is experiencing culture the same way as the executive team. And that's not a conscious thought. It's an assumption we see them making. So we'll often have an organisation say to us, can you come and work with a group of people? We've got a great culture here. We don't understand why they're performing or behaving in the way they are. And when we go in and when we actually look at cultural measures, we find that there are very, very different experiences of the culture. It's not that different groups are creating different aspects of culture. It's they're experiencing the culture in different ways. That's almost 100% sure to be happening in your organisation. It's completely natural. People in different roles have different levels of control, different levels of influence, and that can lead to their experience of culture. So when we're trying to understand what's happening, why people are behaving and acting in certain ways, try and put aside the filter of your experience of the culture and look through their filter. It may be that you believe you've got a wonderful culture because that's your experience of it. But is that everyone else's experience? Hopefully it is, but it's a challenge. It's a thought that all executive teams should challenge themselves with. The sixth one, and another executive behaviour, is around silos. Now, silos always start at the top, and you may be listening to this and say that's not true for our organisation. What I'm going to put to you is that historically it was. So if it's not true today, then historically it was. That you at one point had executives who were siloed, and that then led to those silos filtering down. Even when there's a change at the executive level and those silos start to disappear, it can take some time for the rest to follow, and it takes really explicit and deliberate efforts. Now, a test for you, a test that you can use to say, are we siloed at executive level? When the executive comes together, are people there as the senior finance person, the senior marketing person, the senior operations person, etc., a senior people and culture person? Or are they there as executive members? We believe very strongly that when an executive member is operating out there in the day-to-day business, they have to wear that hat as head of whatever division. When they come together as executive, they have to take that hat off. They bring that expertise, but not that representation. If everyone comes to executive to represent their own division, then we're siloed. If everyone brings that expertise and uses it to contribute to excellent group decision making, then we're moving away from silos. Sometimes that means an executive member will make a decision as an executive member that doesn't necessarily favour their team, that might make work for their team, that might be inconvenient for their team. But that means they're thinking as an executive member and not as a representative of their division or department. The next executive behaviour that we'll look at is compromising. And that's around only exemplifying the target culture when it's convenient. What we sometimes see here is that we compromise to get a result. We compromise under pressure. So we have a lot of resistance from people around some accountability, around some expectations, around some standards, and it becomes inconvenient, and we compromise on the ideal culture. It becomes easier. We have a seat to fill, so we make a compromised hire, someone who's really good at the technical aspect of a role, not all that culturally consistent, and we compromise because it's inconvenient to stay true to the culture because we need that seat filled, or we need that sale made, we need that decision processed. So we can't, that's one of the true tests of our commitment to culture, is what we do when it's inconvenient to stay consistent. The next executive behaviour is all around forgetting the people. And this is when we make decisions as an executive or as individual executive members, and we consider the impact on people as a minor factor in the decision making. It almost becomes secondary. If we're going to remain true to our ideal culture, and we have our business objectives, we have our values, we're clear on why what we do is important, we use a sort of Venn diagram approach and look for the overlapping point of those circles, and that's where the sweet spot in decision making is. There shouldn't be compromise between people and results. We should be prioritising both, and that's not easy. I'm not going to suggest that's a simple process, and sometimes it does mean that we have to move to more medium to long-term thinking and accept there might be a short-term price to pay. But I believe executive teams, most of the time, by letting go of some established boundaries, of some established ways of doing things, can find ways to prioritise both people and results. As soon as we compromise people in the decision-making process, the message to them is the culture we talk about creating is superficial, and they'll give up on it, they'll buy out of it, and consider themselves just part of a machine. The final three are around issues when ideal meets reality. This is one of the biggest ones, and that's the lack of accountability. Changing culture, shaping culture, is an incredibly uncomfortable process because you will get pushback. You'll get pushback and it feels like evidence you're doing the wrong thing. In fact, it might be evidence that you're doing the right thing, that you're making people uncomfortable by no longer accepting mediocrity, by no longer accepting poor behaviour. As I say, people will object to that and it becomes uncomfortable, it becomes inconvenient, and there's a real temptation to let things slide. When we have a person that we rely upon that's hard to replace, we pull back from holding them accountable because what if they leave? When we've got someone who's been there a long time, we tend to go, oh, it's just their style, it's just them, and we pull back from accountability. In that moment, we make the choice to compromise on our ideal culture, and we make the choice to let other people around them suffer negative consequences. So pulling back on that accountability will always result in compromise on culture. Not holding the line is a similar, it's a related thing that executive teams sometimes do, and that's that sort of pulling back under pressure. One of the big tips we give organisations is define the line that you're all prepared to hold and aim for that. You're better off to aim for 75% and commit to it and hold it than you are to aim for 100% and keep caving. Because if you cave on that line, the message is we're not serious about our culture. If you aim for 75% and get there, there's nothing to stop you then recalibrating and now aiming for 85% and then 90% and so on. But pick a line that as an executive you're willing to hold under pressure, when it's inconvenient, when it's uncomfortable, when it's all hitting the fan. And the final one is lip service. And that's thinking about culture, thinking about things like values as tick and flick. So, we've defined our values, we've done enough. And what we need to do, all aspects of culture, including values, needed to be embedded in our processes and behaviours. They needed to be embedded in the way we recruit people, in the way we manage people, in the conversations leaders have with people to coach them, in our performance management processes. They needed to be embedded everywhere. So once they're defined, and once you define the ideal culture, the job's not done. It has to flow through into all those processes and all those behaviours at every level. Two final thoughts. If you've enjoyed this, please take a moment to review us on Google. Some stars are lovely. A sentence or two is even better. That's how people tend to make decisions about whether they'll engage with this webinar, this Plenty in 20, or with us. And again, a reminder, if you've liked this but would like more depth, look out for the email with a link to the Executive On Demand keynote. It's about an 80-minute presentation. It is packed full of practical strategies. In it, I share the framework that we created and trademarked to help organisations change the culture they have into the culture they want. And we freely and openly share that framework as well as a bunch of the strategies that sit underneath it with you. And you're free to implement them in your business, in your organisation, as you see fit. I'll wrap up there because we're right on 20 minutes. Thanks for watching.